Hey, what's up? This is Jake here in Jake's shop. So now it's time for the subframe. I'm going to go ahead and show you little key pointers about things to look for when you're doing a subframe. I've been pretty fortunate on this car, and I'll show you some things as to why, at least in the condition that I bought it in, it's saved me a little bit of effort here. So we'll flip the camera around, and I'll go through the process of checking the subframe, prepping it for installation, as well as showing the subframe connectors that I'm going to be using on this one, as well as the bushings I'm going to be using. Because I have subframe connectors, you want to go with a solid bushing in that application, and I'm not doing any sort of height adjustments with them as well. You can get different height ones. So we'll flip the camera around and show you a little about what I'm doing next in the shop. Okay, so here we go. Here is the subframe bushings themselves. These are a billet aluminum bushing, just like you would see in rubber for a stock application. Because I have subframe connectors, I want this to be solid. It's going to be tied into the rear subframe. It's all one frame now, and it's all one car. Almost like a unibody in some ways, but it gives you the extra strength you really need on this stuff. These are Pro-Forged brand. I've never really heard of them, but they work. They're just a Jeg special, nothing crazy. They give you a little bit of directions with them. I assume these bushings will actually work with multiple applications, Novas and whatnot, but pretty standard stuff. Nice billet aluminum piece. Just what you want. This is a standard height bushing. Some of them come actually a little bit shorter than this if you wanted to really drop your car down. When I was looking at frames for when I did my Firebird, I initially thought of reusing the existing subframe and doing that and really trying to drop it down, but you know, you're getting an extra half inch or so out of it, drop out of that. But I just didn't really go that far. I went with a custom frame, went even crazier. But so anyways, this is the frame. Like I said, this has been really well taken care of, or at least prepped. Nothing's bent, nothing's broken. It's really pretty clean too. Someone painted it and cleaned it. I went ahead and used it as a sawhorse. So I cleaned up a couple of the factory little welds or a little bit of slag that was on the frames you'll see of these eras, and just kind of went through it a little bit. I'll go ahead and prime it and paint it. This is going to be a driver, so I don't really need to go through all the effort of crazy powder coating. I have used a POR 15 product in the past to coat these frames with. It's really thick rubber type stuff, but I don't know. I didn't think it looked that great when it was done. Priming it and painting it will be plenty for this. It'll be a nice driving car. It'll be 10 times better than factory. So anyways, you got the frame here. There's the upper bushing up there that's actually on the firewall, which is on my right here. And then there's a lower bushing here, which is under your seat pan in previous videos that I kind of replaced. That's what's holding the whole frame in these cars. That's why I like subframe connectors in these cars. You know, you throw horsepower at these cars and things can twist and bend and get crazy. A lot of things you're checking for is like the end of that subframe is nice and square. It's not bowed out. It's not bent. It's not rusted in here. This one's really good condition considering how old it is. I do find that on the West Coast primarily, but this is the upper portion of the bushing, and it fits down inside this hole. And you'll notice it's not a tight fit, right? Well, you don't want it to be a tight fit. That actually allows you, after you've got the bolts in, it's loose, you can square the frame of the car to the body, which is key before you weld in those subframe connectors. So that allows you a little bit of movement that I need in those. And then this cup fits on the bottom. It sandwiches it to the frame, and once it's clamped in there, it's solid, and then you bolt the bolt up through it. I'll probably be using Loctite. So some of the next steps, yeah, a couple things on this frame though. I did notice down in the inside of them, sometimes you can look down inside them, and it's not going to be a very good picture, but it could be rusted from the inside too. You don't know what people have done to these things. Now this side actually had dirt in it. Nothing really rust-wise, but it had dirt. So after I get this in the car, I'll still have time. The front of the frame is open. That's why there's drain holes in the bottom of these frames in case water or junk does get down in there, it has a place to go. There's a product that you can get that squirts down the frames, kind of seals them, clears them, and makes sure they're never going to have a problem in the future. So I'll be using that later on after I get this thing welded in and squared in. I'll have, there's drain holes in it, and I'll be able to squirt stuff down inside there. But it was really solid. The whole frame has been, it's in really good condition. You can spend a lot of time cleaning these up, so I'll get to finish cleaning this. I'll shoot some primer and paint. I'm actually only going to paint up to about that upper front piece because I'll be tearing apart that front suspension and putting all new bushings in and whatnot, or bushings in the suspension and whatnot, and cleaning up a couple of those slag welds that are on it. But overall, good frame, good start. I'll get it squared off, and I'll show you how this thing actually goes under the car. I'll jack this car up a little bit, make sure it's level, and then slide the frame under and start bolting her in. Won't show a lot of that on camera, but I'll show after it's loosely bolted next here how to go about squaring it off before we weld in the finish welding the subframe connectors to it. Okay, we're back. Got the subframe in. It's not fully squared yet, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to square this. There's actually a bunch of different stuff on how to do it. I've got my way that I like to do it. So basically what I did is I like to pick a spot on the body because the axle isn't fully squared off in here yet. It's close, but I know that it's off just slightly. There's a little bit of movement in these perches when you go to bolt the leaf springs on, so I know that it can shift back and forth just slightly. You know, you shift it a forward 1/8 of an inch and a back 1/8 of an inch, all of a sudden you got a 1/4 of an inch difference between both sides. So I haven't done that to the rear axle yet. So what I'm doing is I'm using a consistent point on the body on both sides to take a measurement to get the distance of the frame front to back. You know, I want to do that first, get this front to back set, and I want to be really consistent with the body of the car. Now, rockers and stuff can get beat up. This one looks pretty good, but this is a pretty solid point right here with these two where the rocker meets the fender. So I basically dropped a plumb bob down, made a mark on the floor down here of that exact location on both sides of the car, and then I just basically ran the 2x4 there so it's a solid, you know, surface to measure from. Use jack stands to kind of support the 2x4 so don't kick it around. So from that point, you take a measurement, and whatever that measurement is, you'll kind of get an idea how close you are. Now, I've heard rumors GM's tolerances back in the late 60s were anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. I don't know how accurate that is, but I try and get it as close as humanly possible. So from that point back, you take a measurement on each side of the car. Now, if I can do this with one hand, it's going to be amazing, but basically from there. Now, make sure the front tires are not too deflated. Make sure they got air. And I'm getting about 83 inches on that side. Now, I haven't really done anything to this frame yet, and I've just got it started to square off. Now, I also hear rumors that there's these guide holes in here, and originally you're supposed to be able to, there's a hole underneath here. You can run a guide up, and it kind of centers the frame. Now, my guess is back in the day that was probably close enough, but you can kind of see that hole up inside there. And that kind of guides you and makes sure that if that's square, the frame's square. Now, this car being 50 years old, I don't really trust any of that. I trust measurements more about where things are really at. So this is the other side. I've got my jack stand, and you can kind of see my mark on the floor right there, a little black spot. Again, just ran a plumb from that body line down. I'm pretty sure that this side is longer. I think it needs to go back slightly. And the front side might need to go forward slightly. And once you get that distance set, then you can worry about side to side. It's going to be close probably on either side, but yeah, see, that's 83 1/4. So I'm 1/4 inch off, which means the back needs to come back maybe 1/8 of an inch, and the front needs to go forward maybe 1/8 of an inch, and then bam, you got your 1/4 inch. On the underside, the only other thing you have to worry about is, you know, you got your front of the subframe, and it can go like this a little bit. So what you do to kind of verify that, now this is assuming you have a square frame. Hopefully you do, otherwise don't use it. But I like to use the body lines. That light is killing me, so let's try this side. But I like to use the body lines. Now I used a little bit of a ratchet strap in here to kind of hold it and be able to easily move it back and forth. Now you wouldn't want to do that very much. But there's a body seam right here that you can see kind of where that 5 is. Yeah, that's not going to really show up in the camera. But right now it's about 5 1/4. You check the kind of another area of the frame, about 5 1/8. So right now the frame is mimicking what I think is happening, is that it's sitting a little like this, and it needs it just like that. And once you correct that 1/4 of an inch will go out, or that 1/8 of an inch or so will go out of it, and it'll be perfect. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to show that on camera, but you know, basically the other side, same deal. You got a you got the frame in here, and you got your seam. That's assuming that your rocker seam is, this is pretty solid. And this side, yeah, it's slightly over 5. And it's over 5. So yeah, it needs to come, the front needs to come towards the passenger side just slightly. And it just needs to shift like that. And it's about perfect. I did do it once before. It was off worse than that, and I used the come along. And again, I'm just gonna give it a little tweak. I'm gonna use those guide holes actually with my bar, and you can actually get leverage on it from underneath and move it around a little bit from under here. This bar's not the right one, but it'll work. You just use a bar and come underneath this guide hole under here, and you can come up through the body, and you can pull it. See, I can move the frame. That's probably exactly what it needed right there. So anyways, that's the easy way to do it. Now the trick is when you bolt this back up, go slow. Check your measurements again, go slow. Go around and I would alternate bolts and just use your hand. I wouldn't even use an impact. I would just use a hand and a ratchet and bring them in slowly. That way, as you move it, it's not, moving the frame around. So we'll go ahead and do that off camera. I'll get it squared, and then I'll show what I'm going to do for welding the subframe connectors to it. On to the next. Okay, we've got that subframe pretty much squared off in the car. I actually didn't mention earlier, but another reason the tires are not the best points to measure off of on these cars is rubber isn't always necessarily round. So you do want to try and find, solid points, center of axles and things like that, like I did with the body lines, to take those measurements to get it squared off. So anyways, under here, these are the subframe connectors. I did a little bit on the Art Morrison subframe connectors, but this is how you set it. So once everything is squared off and pretty good to go, this is basically what I've got. Similar on each side. This is the end of the subframe, and then the original subframe. There's my subframe connector. So there's a flange here, and it used to have 2 plates that came on each side it would cup each side of the frame in here. Now, obviously, I cut those off, and I really did that just to make it easier. If I had a lift and maybe a bunch of extra hands, it would have been easier, but it was a lot easier to cut it off. So I went ahead, and here's the plates I cut off. I'll be putting one on each side. This is going to weld right there, flat. So you can see I've got the end of this frame nice and clean, and then this is clean, and then I'll weld it in like that. So you'll have one piece here and one piece there. I'll fully weld up on this seam, and I'll fully weld down the center and down the bottom here. I probably won't, you want to leave this open. I mean, this bolt has Loctite on it and a lock washer on it, and it should never move. But if you did ever have to take this off, you still could. I mean, you could cut this piece of steel out here and around the back. I might put a piece on the bottom, but I probably won't. This is pretty thick steel, and this is a really solid point. So it's really trying to, it's keeping the frame from moving back and forth is really what you're looking for. So I probably won't bother with adding another chunk of steel in here. But yeah, that's really all that it is. So once those are welded in, I did go ahead and get this side done so you can see when it's done. I bolted the front core support in, and really, I'm just kind of double checking triangulation measurements from points, getting my body points figured out and seeing how square these points are, going from corner to corner this way and corner to corner that way. There's a little bit of movement in these bushings as well, it can move around just a little, but not much. There is obviously movement when you're bolting the fenders on as well, as you're squaring the body and the hood of the car when you actually do your final assembly. But it's just kind of a pre-check too for me that makes sure that the frame is in right where it needs to go, because if I do need to move it after this, it's going to be a bear. And you can see this subframe connector's pretty much welded in now. I'm going to clean up a little bit of welds there, but solid, and it's still even hot, so I'm not going to mess with it. But yeah, so the other side will have a plate, and welding on my side on the floor is not fun. That's why I made a rotisserie. I don't know what's wrong with me here, but yeah, so I hope that was informative. I'm going to stop it with that for this section. I'll probably be doing some heat shrinking on that hood next and getting the metalwork portion of the rest of the steel work done. The quarters on this thing are great. The doors have teeny little corners that I'll need to do some patch paneling in, so I might do one on those. But for now, she's coming back together. I'm going to test fit these panels, make sure they all work, and before I really start beating on this car and moving sheet metal, I just want to make sure it's all squared before it goes into bodywork. Hey, if you like it, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. Thanks again.